welcome to the Just Ink About It podcast. This is a podcast all about tattoos, the history of tattoos, the origin of the meaning of tattoos. There will be interviews with tattoo artists all about their tattoo journeys, their specialities, their favourite things to tattoo, their least favourite things to tattoo, any funny stories they may have. This first episode is all about traditional Japanese tattooing. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. Traditional Japanese tattoos. In Japan, you won't see many people sporting tattoos, particularly in very visible spaces, like their hands, their neck, their face, and generally you won't see them sporting them in public spaces. And this is because of the very negative stigma that comes with tattoos in Japan. And where does that stigma come from? Well, it goes all the way back to, the first ever recorded documentation of Japanese tattooing was way back in 280 BC, when an ancient Chinese record issued by Jinden describes the Japanese men as having decorative designs all over their bodies. It wasn't until the 17 and 1800s when tattoo became more of an art form, when it was heavily inspired by other mediums of Japanese art, and that same art form, that same style is what we see today in traditional Japanese tattooing. But in 1872, Emperor Meijing, I hope I'm pronouncing these names correctly, banned tattooing, completely banned tattooing, in an attempt to put a clean cut best foot forward for Western trade relations, which was kind of ironic because all the sailors were tattooing themselves while the Japanese were trying to put a clean cut foot forward for the not so clean cut sailors. Most of us, like you or me, us Western folk, will immediately draw the connection between Japanese organised crime, like the Yakuza, and tattooing. But even low-ranking geisha were forced to get tattooed to show their loyalty and their allegiance to certain paying customers or certain gangs. In 1948, after the war, the ban on tattooing was lifted in Japan, and although the stigma remained, heavy regulations around tattooing also remained. And as we see Japanese traditional tattooing celebrated and glorified in Western media like TV shows and movies that depict the Yakuza as the ultimate cool guys with full Japanese bodysuits and really show off this beautiful artwork in, its full glory, and it is still a very underground thing in Japan. The Yakuza got these tattoos as a stance against the government, but also to show their love and their loyalty to Japanese heritage, their country's heritage. And although a lot of the tattoos and the designs were heavily inspired by Japanese artwork, the Yakuza tattoos often displayed the gang's badges and their symbols. Some members of the Yakuza have requested, and these requests have been granted, for them to be skinned after they're dead to preserve their tattoos. It just shows you how highly they think of this artwork, and how they wear it with such pride. It is part of who they are as a person, and it's part of their culture, even if Japanese culture isn't ready to fully accept it. The Save Tattooing movement in Japan is constantly pushing to break that stigma of tattooing in Japanese culture, and its links to organised crime and the Yakuza. and it's pushing to change current laws. As I said, when they lifted the ban of tattooing, they didn't lift very strict restrictions. Um, to practice tattooing in Japan, you have to hold a medical doctorate. And the Save Tattooing movement are trying to change that law because not everybody has the means to go and obtain a medical doctorate just so they can tattoo. So this pushes tattooing further underground. Tattoo artists have been arrested and sentenced for tattooing without a medical license, and this just perpetuates that negative stigma and the criminalization of tattooing. And until they change that law, it'll continue to remain underground and essentially a criminal act. And those who get tattoos, although no longer criminals, until that stigma changes and generations change and mindsets change, if you're heavily tattooed in Japan, unfortunately, most people are going to look at you probably like you're a criminal. So now that we've covered a lot of the kind of culture of tattooing in Japan, we'll go through some of the actual designs and what some of the designs mean and where those designs come from. So probably the most popular, the most well-known of Japanese tattooing designs is the koi fish. This is probably because of the TV show Miami Ink, when Amy James seemed to basically offer every Tom, Dick and Harry a koi fish tattoo. The koi fish represents perseverance, and the reason it represents perseverance is because of the original story of the koi fish. So that story comes from the koi and the Yellow River in China. So the kois made their way upstream by swimming against the current, and then they reached the waterfall, and at the top of the waterfall was called the Gate of the Dragon. The kois started to swim up the waterfall, and as the kois started to get to the very top of the waterfall, the demons kept raising the height of the waterfall each time to stop the kois getting over the top. Eventually, one koi fish who persevered and got over the top of the waterfall was rewarded by the gods for his perseverance and was turned into a shiny gold dragon. So that's why the koi fish represents perseverance, and I think that's where the dragon tattoo comes from. It's, a continuation of that kind of same story of, perseverance and, looking back on your past and, having moved on from, that time period in your life. The next tattoo design is an Onai mask. So the choice of an Onai mask tattoo is generally for those who believe in good and evil. Nowadays the mask symbolises protection, and for those who believe in the spiritual world, an Onai was known as like a demon or a troll in like Japanese folklore. The word comes from Onai Mai, I think that's how you say it, and that's original meaning was to be concealed, due to this character hiding behind things. It's kind of a Japanese version of a Day of the Dead, which we see in the Mexican culture, and this is because in the 10th century, in Japan, the Onai was defined as the soul of the dead. As I said, nowadays the Onai has shaken off that kind of wicked past and is now known as a protector, and we see men wearing Onai costumes leading parades, and this is because they scare away bad demons, and we even see Onai masks being incorporated into Japanese buildings in the roof tiles for that same reason, to dispel any sort of bad spirits. Another mask that we see is a Hanya mask. I think I'm pronouncing these correctly. I hope I am. I tried to look up the pronunciation, but I'm terrible at them. This mask is often confused with an Onai mask, but has very different meanings. The meaning of the Hanya mask goes right back to the 14th century, when it was used in traditional Japanese theatre. The Hanya mask was used in acts to depict a woman that was overwhelmed with sorrow, envy, or rage. So much so that the Hanya demon completely takes over this woman, and she takes on the form of that demon. And in the plays, that demon was often depicted as like a dragon or a serpent. The most popular play that this is depicted in is called The Prince of Janji, I think that's how you pronounce it, who leaves his mistress, who's called Lady Rajoko, to return to his pregnant wife. And Lady Rajoko is so consumed with jealousy and rage that she is consumed by the Hanya demon, and it kills her. It leads to her death. So a lot of people get that tattoo to, like, I mean, I have that tattoo. I have it tattooed here on my arm. You can see that in my TikTok videos on my tattoos. I got that tattoo to represent, how jealousy can consume you, and what is meant for you will come for you, and not to be jealous of other people's accomplishments. That, what is meant for me in my lifetime will come to me in my lifetime, and I shouldn't be jealous of other people because what they're currently having, and it might be what I want, it's meant for them, and what's meant for me will come for me when that time is right. And I think that's why a lot of people get that mask tattooed now, is to kind of represent that kind of, to be wary of the all consumption of envy or rage. Another mask that we see tattooed also comes from Japanese theatre. It's called the Okame mask, and this is to show happiness and good fortune. Another mask is the Okana mask, which often shows wisdom, and this is often depicted as like an older man. There's an article that is really, really in depth, and it's super good for origins, placements, and the meanings behind Japanese tattoos. I'll leave that in the description below. So if you want to look really deep dive into a rabbit hole of Japanese tattooing, that's a really good article to go by. Another thing that is deeply rooted in Japanese culture and art, and particularly their tattooing, is colour. So you'll see a lot of Japanese work is bright, bold colours. Most of the black you will see will be wind bars, as black is not only a colour of mourning, but it's also a colour used of mystery. And the wind is a very mysterious thing, I'm sure, way back in the day. And I think that's probably why wind bars in Japanese work is very often black. Another colour they use quite a lot is white. White is a very dominant colour in Japanese culture. Their taxis are all white, as opposed to, other countries like America would be yellow, and in the UK they would be black. White symbolises passing away. It symbolises purity and truth, and like a thick blanket of snow, it represents a clean slate and a fresh start. Red is a colour we see a lot in Japanese work, as we see it used in a lot of the masks that I just spoke about. Cherry blossoms are often red, lotus flowers are often depicted in red. This is because red is a colour of joy. You'll see it used a lot in weddings and birthdays, New Year's, as it symbolises vitality. Blue is another colour you'll see. You'll see it used in the clothing of geisha or samurais when they're tattooed. And blue is the colour of luck. And Japanese people will often wear blue as the choice of outfit colour to go to interviews because they believe it to be good luck. Green is the colour of nature. I think that kind of speaks for itself. Pink also speaks for itself. It represents feminism. Hence we see, cherry blossoms, lotus flowers, and all these other kind of really delicate feminine flowers and stuff tend to be reds or pinks, or a kind of washed out red leaning towards a pink to kind of represent that. Purple is a colour of royalty or regalness. This is because during the Edo period, lower class people were not allowed to wear vibrant colours. And yellow is for optimism and prosperity, and that's why we see koi fishes often in red, yellow, orange, or a mix of those kind of three colours, to bring out, joy, prosperity, perseverance, optimism. The colours that they're using are also deeply rooted in the meanings of the tattoos. My Japanese work, I only have 2 Japanese tattoos, both of them are black and grey. I just didn't want colour tattoos, just personally not for me. But this is why we see traditional Japanese work be so heavily coloured, and the colours that are chosen for particular tattoos have just as much as importance as the tattoos themselves.